The old school hallway smelled faintly of chalk dust and disinfectant. Every morning, Henry walked in with his mop, bucket, and broom, quietly doing his work while teachers and students passed by without a second glance. His worn-out shoes squeaked on the polished floors, and his faded uniform carried years of labor. Most of the staff barely noticed him, except when they wanted to laugh. "Hey, Henry," one teacher mocked, "don't forget to shine the floors. That's the only math you know, multiply and shine." The students chuckled, some whispering cruel jokes. But what nobody knew, what Henry had hidden for years, was a past far brighter than anyone in that building could imagine. One day, all it took was a piece of chalk in his hand, and everything changed. Henry had worked at Westbrook High for over 10 years. The students only saw him as the man who emptied the trash cans and scrubbed the cafeteria tables. Teachers spoke around him as if he wasn't even in the room. But at night, when the school was quiet, Henry stayed behind longer than required. He'd enter classrooms, stare at the math problems left on the blackboard, and silently solve them in his head. Equations, numbers, and formulas. It was like breathing to him. He wasn't just a janitor. He had once been a brilliant mathematician, a man whose life had taken a tragic detour. One Friday afternoon, Henry walked past the teacher's lounge with his mop. Inside, a few teachers were laughing. "Can you imagine Henry teaching?" one said sarcastically. "Yeah," another added. "His lesson would be about sweeping angles and geometry of the mop." The laughter stung, but Henry said nothing. He lowered his head and kept walking. What they didn't know was that behind his silence was a storm waiting to break. One afternoon, while Henry was wiping down desks, a student named Sarah lingered behind. Unlike most, she didn't laugh at him. She observed. She noticed the way Henry paused at the board, his eyes scanning the math equations left by the teacher. She watched his lips move, whispering numbers, then saw him quietly erase a wrong step the teacher had left behind. The next day, Sarah confronted him. "Mr. Henry, do you know math?" she asked, wide-eyed. Henry chuckled nervously. "I know a little." "A little?" Sarah smirked. "You just corrected Mr. Daniels' mistake yesterday." Henry froze. He hadn't realized anyone had seen. Sarah's curiosity pushed Henry to finally reveal a sliver of his story. "I wasn't always a janitor," Henry said quietly, leaning on his mop handle. "I once dreamed of teaching at a university. Numbers made sense to me in ways words couldn't. But life, it doesn't always go as planned. My wife got sick. Bills piled up. I dropped everything, even my doctorate studies, just to keep her alive. And when she passed," he swallowed hard. "Well, I took the first job I could find." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But why hide it? Why let them laugh at you?" Henry sighed. "Because proving them wrong isn't always worth the fight. Sometimes peace is in silence." But Sarah disagreed, and she was about to set something in motion. One Monday morning, Sarah purposely asked her math teacher a tough question in class. The teacher fumbled, gave a half answer, and moved on quickly. "Excuse me," Sarah raised her hand again, "but I think Mr. Henry knows the answer." The entire class erupted into laughter. "Henry? The janitor?" One boy snickered. The teacher smirked, insulted. "Sarah, let's not waste time." But Sarah wouldn't back down. At lunch, she pulled Henry aside. "They don't believe in you. Prove them wrong. Just once." Henry hesitated, but deep inside, the ember of pride he had buried for years flickered to life. The turning point came on a stormy Tuesday. The substitute math teacher failed to show up, leaving the class restless. Henry was cleaning the hall when the principal asked him to keep an eye on the students until a replacement arrived. Inside, the students were throwing paper balls, shouting and laughing. Sarah whispered, "Now's your chance." Henry reluctantly walked to the board, chalk trembling in his hand. At first, the class laughed. "Look, the janitor thinks he's a teacher." But then Henry began writing. Not just numbers, but complex equations, formulas most of the students had never seen before. Silence fell. They watched in awe as Henry explained step by step, his voice steady, confident, alive. By the end, even the loudest kid sat frozen. Sarah grinned. Told you. Word of what happened in Sarah's class spread like wildfire. Students whispered in the hallways about how the janitor solved equations even their teacher couldn't explain. By the next morning, 2 teachers stood outside classroom door, curious. Henry tried to avoid attention, focusing on his mop, but Sarah insisted he come back to the board. "Mr. Henry, can you explain yesterday's formula again?" she asked loudly. The teachers exchanged smirks, waiting for him to embarrass himself. But instead, Henry calmly broke down the solution with such clarity that even they leaned in, trying to keep up. For the first time, the laughter turned into stunned silence. Not everyone was impressed. During the next staff meeting, a senior teacher scoffed. "So what if he knows some math? He's still just a janitor." Another chuckled. "It's one thing to play with chalk, it's another to teach." Henry overheard their words as he emptied the trash. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. He had heard worse before. Still, Sarah encouraged him. "They're scared, Mr. Henry, because you know more than them." Henry smiled faintly. She wasn't wrong. A week later, the principal, curious about the rumors, decided to test Henry. "Mr. Henry," she said in her office, "if you're as capable as the students say, prove it. Tomorrow, take over one of the senior classes. Show me what you've got." Henry's heart pounded. It had been years since he taught anyone formally. But Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Don't hide anymore. That night, in his small apartment, Henry stayed up revisiting old textbooks and notes he had kept tucked away in a box. His passion reignited. Tomorrow could change everything. The next morning, Henry stood in front of a class of seniors. The room buzzed with laughter and disbelief. "Seriously? The janitor's teaching us?" One student jeered. Henry ignored the noise, picked up the chalk, and began. Within minutes, the room fell silent as he unraveled problems they had struggled with all semester. He didn't just solve them. He explained them so clearly that even the weakest students understood. By the end of the lesson, the students erupted into applause. Some even stood on their desks, cheering. The principal, watching from the back, was speechless. The following week, Henry was invited to the school assembly. The principal addressed the entire student body. "Sometimes, greatness hides where we least expect it. Mr. Henry, our janitor, has shown not only mastery of mathematics, but also the heart of a teacher." The auditorium filled with applause as Henry was invited onto the stage. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Soon after, the school board offered Henry a chance to officially teach evening classes while keeping his janitorial job. Parents began requesting that their children be placed in his sessions. But more than recognition, Henry found something deeper: purpose. At night, when he stood before a chalkboard filled with equations, he felt alive. Teaching wasn't just a job. It was who he was meant to be. Sarah sat in the front row of every class, smiling proudly. Months later, at a special ceremony, Henry received an honorary certificate from the city's education board for his contribution to students. The same teachers who once mocked him now stood, clapping reluctantly. The students who once laughed now respected him deeply. Holding the chalk in his hand, Henry said softly into the microphone, "You all saw me as just a janitor, but knowledge has no uniform. Greatness doesn't always wear a tie. Sometimes it carries a mop and waits for its moment." The crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Henry wasn't invisible anymore. He was unforgettable.